me the invitation, and I said, can we just come together and pray?
I would rather have a child lay hands on me and pray that I be healed than somebody carnally intoxicated wannabe prophets.
We are not looking for this cookie cut box kind of who God is and how people function. We're okay with the fluidity of different things. I can experience the Holy Spirit.
You guys have a proximity and a relationship of trust enough that the sister could pull your coattail and say, so you know that was some sexy stuff right there.
And beautiful and going places and doing great things, but also can be transparent. We help each other.
Why is it that sometimes when I'm supposed to be preaching the unadulterated gospel, that I'm lying in my presentation?
Wow.
That my voice is not the voice that structurally my vocal folds have. I've been listening to someone else so long that I'm trying to sound like someone else because they get more web hits.
Will never be relevant because they do mediocre work. And especially in a digital age where people can catch you if your work is ragged.
They're listening to every single word you're saying. And they're taking what you say and applying it to their life. And if you're saying something that doesn't make sense, then you're misleading your folk. And you don't even know.
The majority of those churches were founded by women.
For us as women, we are relational beings. You know, we are wired. You know, it's in our DNA. We cannot help ourselves. We're just wired for relationships. And what people fail to forget is that that's what church is about.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome again to Timely Wisdom. God has brought us another week. Let us know that you are here. Hello, Ashley. Hello, Dorothy Manning. Hello, Nala Curry. Like, tag, and share. Like, tag, and share. Let's start with you, Dr. Wright, to hear from you, and then we'll hear from you, Dr. Brenda Wallace, and then Dr. Bradford, if you would, and then introduce our guest for us today.
God bless you, Dr. Burns and Dr. Wallace and Dr. Bradford. So nice to see you all. It is such a blessing to be back again. All is well on this end. We're seeing yet some COVID spikes. Just asking that everybody do the right thing, okay? Just do the right thing. If you're not going to wear a mask for you, wear a mask for me. The other thing is we had our second service back in on this Sunday, and we were glad to be back in the house of the Lord, even as the psalmist David would say. And I just cannot emphasize or stress enough. Vote, y'all. Go vote. I don't care what it looks like. I don't care what they're saying. Your vote counts. Please go vote.
Yes.
Amen. Thank you so much. We have started early voting here in Georgia. Hello, everyone, and thank you for those who waited over 2 hours to cast their votes. Lines are everywhere. My husband shared with me that yesterday the line was around the mall. People waiting to vote. They had some issues with the voting machines, but people said, I'm still going to vote. I'm going to stay right here until I cast my vote. So all of you who are voting here in the state of Georgia, we've got some really, really powerful people on the ballot, not only for the president and vice president, but for some senators that are in the running. The last poll said that Raphael Warnock was 43 and Loeffner was 40. So we need to make that we need to make Georgia blue. Wow. We have more African Americans that can vote, that do not vote, and we need your votes. We need you to be registered and to vote. I agree with you, Dr. Sarita. The vote is important. Vote,
Come
vote,
on, y'all.
vote, vote, vote.
Oh, Dr. Bradford, right before you go, I do want our listening audience to know that we are nonpartisan. And so each of us speak to our own views. We really want people to make sure that you go to the polls, but I do just want to make that known for all of our viewers,
Yes,
no matter what political party you're part of, that we are still here about timely wisdom. Dr. Bradford.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm excited about today. There are so many lines, as you stated, in Georgia. I'm just glad that people are out voting.
Yes.
It is time, it's past time for people to vote. I'm seeing younger people at the polls, and I'm excited about that. Some of them for the first time are voting, thank goodness. And as you stated, Dr. Wright, there is a major peak. There are peaks of this COVID-19 for the last 2 or 3 weeks. And I noticed that the bars are starting to open back up, but in Dallas County, they said no.
My God.
And I'm so glad right now. But in the surrounding areas, of course, you can go 15 minutes and you're in another county, and of course they're open. But what I want to do is introduce our guests. We have talked enough. I want to bring this powerhouse to the conversation. This woman of God, the Reverend, I call her the Reverend Dr. Gina M. Stewart. She is a pastor, preacher, visionary, builder, mentor, professor. I'm calling her professor, and a daughter of the Christ Missionary Baptist Church in Memphis. She has led the congregation of Christ Missionary Baptist Church since March 1995. She is a native of Memphis and a daughter of CMBC, of course, Christ Missionary Baptist Church, where she was baptized and mentored by her predecessor and former pastor, the Reverend Eddie L. Curry. On March 4th, 1995, she was elected by majority vote to serve as the pastor of CMBC. She is the first African American female elected to serve an established African American Baptist congregation in Memphis and Shelby County. Dr. Stewart is a 1978 graduate of Memphis Catholic High School. She earned a Bachelor of Business Administration, a BBA in marketing in '82 from the University of Memphis. In 1989, she received a Master of Education and this is important. I'm reading this because this is important. Master of Education in Administration and Supervision from Trevecca Nazarene College in Nashville, Tennessee. She received the Master of Divinity degree from Memphis Theological Seminary in May '96. Also attended Harvard Divinity School Summer Leadership Institute for Church-Based Community and Economic Development in 2000. She received the Doctor of Ministry degree from the ITC in Atlanta, Georgia in '07.
All right.
And yet she is currently pursuing a PhD in African American preaching at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, Indiana. When I tell you this woman of God is courageous, bold, powerhouse, and a preaching phenom, go ahead and type in the comment section, welcome the Reverend Dr. Gina M. Stewart, my sorority sister. I had to get that in there.
Oh Lord, oh Lord, oh Lord, oh Lord. I have to get Dr.
Good afternoon.
Hello there, Dr. Stewart. How are you?
I am great. How about you?
Absolutely wonderful. We are so excited that you said yes, and time permitted for you to come on. This is a treat for us. Many people are wanting to know they don't have to ask who this woman is. All they have to do is look on the screen and say, oh my gosh, this powerful preaching phenom. Oh my gosh, we just love her. And you are doing a mighty work in the kingdom. Our subject is there honor for, is there a prophet? Is there honor for the prophet?
My God.
And I'm looking, is a prophet without honor? How did you navigate through pastoring a church you grew up in?
Is that the question?
Oh, we going right in it.
All right.
Let's
just jump in. Go
right in it. Right. Well, first of all, let me ask you this. How you doing? Let me just
I'm great.
I'm excited.
Through the chase, right?
Can you tell I'm excited? How you doing, Doctor?
I'm great. I'm great. Good afternoon, Dr. Bradford and Dr. Burns, Dr. Wright, and Dr. Wallace. Thank you so much for this invitation. The question, how did I navigate pastoring my home church? Well, I would first say with the help of the Lord. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
But I think that there are two benefits, I would say, to growing up in a church where people know you, where they've known you since you were in pigtails. My mother joined Christ Missionary Baptist Church when I was 7 years old. The church is 53 years old, and I've been there all 53 of those years.
Wow.
The church is only 53 years old, and I'm the second pastor. So it's really the only right. It's really the only church that I have ever known. And I think that there are the advantages of growing up in a church where you lead and serve is that people trust you because they know you.
Amen.
But people also don't trust you because they know you.
Amen.
Fortunately, I was elected by a plurality or 2/3 majority vote. And it was also during a time where there's a lot of excitement and energy behind my election. I was finishing up my MDiv at Memphis Theological Seminary. And the church was simultaneously about to vote for a pastor as I was finishing up my last semester. So there was a lot of energy, enthusiasm, anticipation around the election. But because I grew up in that church, and I would also say because my pastor, who was really in a lot of ways, in my opinion, ahead of his own time, he had sort of prepared our church in his own way to take the risk to step outside of the tradition and elect a woman. Because when we were in the process, there were people who were saying on the outside, if you all elect this woman, the church is going to split. If you elect this woman, you'll only have men. If you elect this woman, she won't last more than 5 years. But the people were willing to test the tradition and take the risk of taking a chance on a woman, which that was 25 years ago. Which I think, and I say this all the time, that the congregation really needs to be commended for having that kind of courage, particularly in a denominational tradition that to some degree and in some instances still is challenged by women as pastors. We know that has evolved and it's evolving, but historically our denomination did not necessarily affirm women, particularly as pastors, in some instances in the ministry. And so the congregation was willing to take that risk. And I just think it was the right season for our church. I cannot say that every day was easy. Leadership is not easy for anyone, whether you're male or female. But I was blessed to be elected to serve a congregation that was willing to give me permission to pastor.
Oh, God.
I think that's very important.
Yes, it is.
They gave me permission. They gave me permission, and they continue to give me permission to lead and to pastor. Now, I do believe that because of the fact that I grew up in that church and I'd always been active in the church, I've served in just about every capacity except a deacon and a trustee. I was the secretary of the Sunday school. I taught Sunday school. I was an usher. I knew no signals, but I was an usher. No, not one signal. We were shy, but we didn't know any signals. We just had a heart to serve the Lord. And it was really my pastor's idea that we would start a young adult usher board. We would shop every third Sunday. Did not know a signal. Not one signal. Okay, but we were sharp and sang in the choir, and it was an announcement clerk, and enjoyed a close relationship with my pastor because his daughter and I were very close friends. And so actually he was the person that sort of put his thumb on the fact that there might be a call on my life long before I did. So he was not surprised when I went to him to say, after wrestling with the call for about a year, he said, I was wondering what took you so long. You'll never say, you'll never rest until you say yes. And so I believe that navigating that transition from member to pastor, while there were some bumps and there were some challenges, and of course, a 2/3 majority means that 1/3 of the people did not vote for me. But I have to say that the other 1/3 did not fight me. They did not fight me, and if they fought, they fought they fought passively, not aggressively. But one of the things that I made a point of doing, and this is still a part of my DNA, my pastoral DNA now, and that is I'm very hands-on, and I believe in touching the people. And so I would say that one of the things that helped me navigate this transition as a pastor was pastoral care. I stand by that even after 25 years of ministry, that pastoral care, there is no substitute for authentically leading, sustaining, guiding, and caring for the people of God. And caring for them without any kind of, reference to whether the people voted for me or whether they didn't. After the election was over, I was everybody's pastor. And so I made it a point to pastor everybody, even the people that didn't vote for me, and even the people that in some ways, in their own ways, gave me an indication that they were not necessarily that excited about me being the pastor. I pastored all of them. I went to the funerals. I showed up for them when they were in the hospital. I went to pray for them. I still do that. And so I would say, as you asked that question, how did I navigate it? I navigated it, and I continue to navigate it through pastoral care. And that is because there's no substitute for genuinely caring for the people of God. And, of course, one of my mentors, Reverend Shirley Prince, used to always say to me, she said, Rhodey, some people are sandpaper for your sanctification. So there's a transformation, I believe, that takes place within the people, but there's also a transformation that takes place in the preacher and the pastor. And so it's been a great marriage over these 25 years. Yes, there have been challenges. Yes, there have been struggles. But overall, I can say that God has blessed me to pastor a great church. And I have great people, and I have people who are courageous. You really do have to be courageous to elect a woman in 1995. I mean, even now, it takes a certain amount of courage, but especially in 1990, and to be the first. There's always a cost to stepping to the edge of your potential and testing the limits. And it took courage to do that. It still takes courage. Even now, after 25 years, there are still people that tell some of my members, they're going to hell because they're under a woman. After 25 years, I'm sure you all have heard of Dr. Bradford. I don't know if everybody on the line is a pastor, but after all these years, I mean, they could be worshiping at Bedside Baptist. Elder Pillar is their pastor. But when people find out that they're under a woman, there are people who still say, they want to quote the scripture. You know what Paul said? Paul said that a woman ought not usurp authority over a man, and they will tell them that they are going to hell. So it has taken courage, and it has taken a strong conviction to follow a woman and to be there. And it's not just women that attend our church. We have men too that attend our church as well. And not all of them were there when I came. Many of them came after I started to pastor.
My God, you mentioned that it took you a year to answer your call. Can you tell us a little bit about that struggle?
Yeah, I was initially I believe this. I believe my initial call to ministry occurred in 1986. I was leaving my parents' house, and I heard not necessarily an audible voice, but a hard impression calling me to ministry. I know that it was the voice of God because I started crying. That it struck that kind of fear in my heart. And I just sort of, pushed it out of my mind because at that particular time, I was 26 years old. I really had my mind on getting married and having 3 children. And in my mind, if I go into the ministry, I would never get married. Who's going to want to marry a woman preacher? So I pushed it to the back of my mind for about 3 years and ignored it because I was already speaking in churches. So I figured that I could just make a bargain with God and partially obey. But partial obedience is still disobedience. So but God let me slide for about 3 years. And then in the year of 1989, I had this restlessness, this persistence that just would not let me rest. I didn't see any lights. I didn't see a bush. I didn't see myself preaching before crowds or anything like that. There was this persistence lingering persistence that would not let me go. And I took that year to pray, to reflect, to think about the implications. What would my parents think? What would my dad think? What would my friends think? How would this affect my relationships? And of course, after much prayer and just think about it for about a year, I finally went to my pastor on the last Sunday in December of 1989, right before service started. It was raining cats and dogs that day. And I showed up and he looked at me like, what are you doing back here? Because I'm normally out in the audience. And I said, I need to talk to you about something. And he said, what is it? And he sat down and crossed his legs. He used to cock his head to the side. And I said, I think I'm being called to the ministry. And I started crying. And he said, I wondered what took you so long. And then he said, you'll never rest until you say yes. And that was the beginning of it. And then one Sunday, well, the truth of the matter is, I don't always tell this part of my story. The truth of the matter is, I went to tell him that I was called to the ministry and that I was going to join another church. How is that? And he said to me, I know that sometimes the church you grow up in is not the church that you're raised in, is not the church where you remain after you become an adult. He said, and if that's what you feel you need to do, you go ahead. But know that if you ever want to come back home, the door is always open. Well, the door never shut because I never left. Because the church, in all honesty, and this is something I think is very important to say, because in that season, our church was going through a significant decline. You know how churches follow that bell curve, and you reach that plateau, and you either can sustain it or you go downward. The church was going through a significant decline. People were leaving and going to join other churches, and being young and thinking that I knew everything, I was ready to move on too. But every Sunday that I tried to, go somewhere else, something would happen where I ended up not going. I ended up staying at home. Probably I don't even think I was at home a month. But anyway, and one day the Lord just said to me very clearly, what have you done to help make it better?
That'll preach.
Look here. That's a question.
What have you done to make it better? You keep talking about what you don't like and how things need to change. What have you done to make it better? And when the Lord asked me that question, I made a decision then that I would go back and be a help to my pastor. And that's what I did. And so one Sunday, I was sitting in the back of the church, second row from the rear, from the door. Church not real big, but anyway, I still sit in the back of the church. He was in the pulpit. He came out of the pulpit, walked down the center aisle, came to where I was sitting, told me to get my things, and escorted me back down the aisle to the pulpit. That was the Sunday that he announced to the church that I had been called to the ministry. So not only was I the first woman elected to serve a Baptist congregation, but I was the first woman called to preach in our church. Now, this is not to say that he did not embrace women. My pastor was Methodist by tradition and profession and upbringing. He married a Baptist. And when he married a Baptist, he ended up starting to pastor the church where she grew up. And then our church, and this is a sidebar, so forgive me because I tell multiple stories at a time.
Love it. We love it.
Our church actually started with 27 people, 27 or 32 people. 27 people that didn't even have a building or a pastor. So they called him from Brownsville, Tennessee to be their pastor. And when he left First Baptist Brownsville, people thought he had lost his mind because he left an established Baptist church. It was the leading church in Brownsville, I believe, First Baptist in Brownsville, to come and lead a people that did not even have a building. They barely had a name. And there were probably, at the time that he came, I know there weren't 100 people that were members of that church. So he always believed in women. I grew up in an environment where I saw women in leadership. My pastor had no problem with women in leadership. And he had no problem with women in ministry. I don't ever remember a time in my context, which is Baptist, seeing women told that they had to stand on the floor to use the rostrum, to use the pulpit on the floor, whether they were speaking for Women's Day, even if they were laity and not clergy, they were given access to the pulpit. He was very affirming of the gifts of women, was not intimidated by women, as we would call them, strong women, or what you call alpha females. He was not intimidated by strong women. And so I grew up in a church where I saw women in leadership. Now, we didn't have women deacons. He didn't ordain women deacons before I died, but we had women trustees for a long time. And women were in leadership. There was one who was over superintendent of the Sunday school. He worked very closely with women in his circle was also inclusive. His inner circle, it was male and female. I can remember that for even growing up in the church, that there were women and men who were around him, who he would listen to, and who he would often go to for counsel. And so it was not just a matter of being called to a church, but it was being called to a church to pastor, or growing up in a church where I was reared and nurtured, but being nurtured in a church where the pastor or my predecessor was fearless. I won't say that he didn't have fears, but he didn't let his fears, in my opinion, stop him from doing what he believed was God's will for our church. And I think it's one of the reasons why they were able to do that 25 years ago. I mean, it's the only reason why they were able to do it, in my opinion, because people on the outside were more concerned about whether or not I was going to be elected than they were. Many of them had already made their mind up. So, the rest is really just history.
Wow, it's been just amazing. I'm listening to your story, and then I'm hearing you share about how your pastor did not feel threatened or challenged by women being in leadership. And I'm thinking of my own self, having grown up Methodist, but yet not necessarily seeing that same thing during the same time. And so it's quite interesting for me to hear this coming from someone who grew up Baptist. And I haven't grown up Methodist and in what I call the deep South Georgia. Yes. And there were some women who were called, but it was not something that was affirmed.
Right.
And so this is just very, very powerful.
Yeah, and refreshing.
I would also say people often talk about mentorship. You didn't ask me this question,
yes,
but I think the other thing that is important to say for when I came along in ministry, because there were not a lot of women that I saw as preachers. I mean, there were preachers that came to our church for women days and things like that. But as a general rule, I didn't see women like we see women now.
Mhm.
But I think what's important is that that ministry is not just taught; it's also caught. And what you do in ministry. My pastor was my mentor, but we didn't spend a lot of time together. You know, he didn't call me and have me, and I didn't ride around with him and hang out with him. But he did allow me access into his space.
Yeah.
And so what I learned to do was to be a student of his practices. And so much of what I know today and much of how I pastor, to be quite honest, has to do with what I learned watching him. Now, without a doubt and without any fear of contradiction, I can say that he gave me freedom to serve. By the time I took the parish practicum at the seminary, all of the things that we were doing or had to do, I had already done, because he let me baptize, he let me serve at the table, he would let me preach, he let me dedicate some of the babies that are now, in fact, one of them, I think, is probably going on 27 or 28 years old. I just saw her the other day, and she said, "Pastor, do you remember that I was the first baby you dedicated?" But I wasn't even the pastor.
Wow.
He let me dedicate a baby when I was a minister. So that type of environment, it was priceless for me. It was nothing but the grace of God. I mean, nothing that I did to deserve it. It was only sheer grace and mercy of God, that God would see fit to order my steps and orchestrate my life in such a way that I would be nurtured and raised really in a church like that. Only God could do something like that.
Amen.
Yeah,
I have this question. As I've already said, I'm Methodist, so denominationally tied. What has that been like for you outside of the walls of your church? Are you all part of a convention, or have the other Baptist brothers, or even Methodists or other male pastors outside? Or what has that interaction been like?
We are, first of all, we are aligned with Progressive National Baptist Convention. Of course, Baptist churches are autonomous, but we are aligned with Progressive National Baptist. The response following my election was actually mixed, and the reason why it was mixed, and I'm saying this based on the Baptist brethren now. The reason why it was mixed is because, as I mentioned, when I first started preaching, well, before I started preaching, I was speaking at a lot of churches. So many of those preachers and pastors had invited me to their church to speak. So for many of them, it was a seamless transition. I used to go and speak for Dr. Ed Parker, the late Dr. David Larry Boyle, the late Dr. Lee Brown, people like that opened up their pulpits to me, and so many others. And so when I Reverend Netters, Dr. Netters at Mount Vernon, Westwood, so many of them opened their doors and allowed me to speak when I was speaking. And so when I accepted my call to preach, they were sitting up at my at my installation, grinning like it was their daughter. So Dr. Dandridge Wilburn, I mean, there were a number of brothers, Reverend Chester Berryhill. There were so many of them that were affirming and encouraging. Dr. Lasemba Gray, many of them. For them, it was a no-brainer, because they said basically the same thing that my pastor said. Reverend Kenneth Whalum at Olivet Baptist Church, he used to tell me all the time, "When you gonna stop bootlegging the gospel?"
Yeah.
I know you're a preacher. Why don't you just go and preach? Reverend Eugene Waller, just so many of the brothers. But then there were others who basically said, in fact, the Tuesday after my pastor let me preach my first sermon, which he let me do on a Sunday morning at 11 o'clock. That's unheard of. Sunday night is reserved for trial sermons.
That's right.
Well, he let me preach. So, it was all over the city that I had preached. So he went to Four-Way Grill. That's where the preachers used to meet sometimes.
All right.
And he was accosted by this group preachers.
Wow.
And you know, they jumped all over him. They said, Curry, what you doing? Letting that woman preach at your church. Now all of the women reminds me of what they said after Vashti in the King Ahasuerus, and his counselors came in and said, if you don't get her under control, all these women gonna be cutting up.
Yep.
They said to him, all of the women go start saying they've been called to preach. So one pastor, who I'll leave nameless, said to him, not because I don't know who he is, I'll just
His best.
I won't tarnish his legacy. He said to my pastor, well, I hope that they invite her to my church to preach, because when she comes to my church to preach, I'm going to make her stand on the floor. And my pastor tilted his head and said, and I hope you invite her to preach too, because the day that you invite her to preach at your church, that's the day she'll preach in the pulpit at Christ Missionary.
Say, listen.
So, you know, he was really an advocate. You know, and what I do know though, and I know this, is that there were battles that he fought that I was not aware of until he died.
Wow.
Everybody that embraced my ministry while he was living, you know, the truth came out for some, not all of them. It was only a few, but the truth came out for some. For some people, it was an adjustment. For some people, they really did not want a woman. And I mean, that's just a part of their tradition. So I don't say that to, you know, bash anybody or to make anybody look bad. It's just it was a part of the process. But as I said before, pastoral care is the will of God. Pastoral care is the touchstone. It's what helped me to transition into that role and navigate pastoring in a context where for many people it was the first time. And so even when I look back now after 25 years, and I remember how frustrated I used to get sometimes with people that, you know, just had issues with women. You know, when people have been accustomed to doing things a certain way, and the way they've been oriented, part of what their tradition is, what their embedded theology is, they don't shift overnight.
Right.
So one of the things that God has shown me in retrospect is that extra grace is required. I didn't have it back then. Now I'm not saying it because I had it, but in retrospect, somebody said, I think it was Kierkegaard, who said life is lived looking forward and understood looking backward. And now at 60, I was 35 when I was elected. But at 60, I can look back and see that, you know, time is required for people to shift and to transition. And sometimes when we go into ministry, we're excited. We have great dreams. We have great visions. I was fresh out of seminary, had a lot of ideas. I was ready. Dr. Roz Nichols and I were having breakfast the other day, and we were laughing at each other because we both graduated together. We were talking about our graduation picture and how bright our eyes were, and how excited we were ready to take the world by storm. By storm. But little did we know.
Surprise, surprise, Gomer.
But that those smiles would with many days be replaced by the tracks of our tears, because we serve the Lord with many tears. But it's been a good journey.
Can you talk about that grace though? You kind of slid it on in and jumped in it and jumped out.
Extra grace.
Yeah. Can you talk just a little bit about it?
Well, I say that because I'm a different person now at 60 than I was at 35. And you know, I was a grown woman, but I still wasn't finished growing. And so even as the church had to grow, I had to grow too. And I think that one of the things that probably has happened over the years, it's just a part of growing in God and going with God and growing with God and learning life lessons and learning from ourselves, because I believe that to be self-aware is a gift. And so to be self-aware and to be willing to interrogate my own stuff, my own baggage, to own my own stuff, to own my own baggage, to admit that, you know, by temperament, I'm impatient. By temperament, I am an alpha female. By temperament, I am a type A personality. By temperament, I am a borderline perfectionist. And so you come into this new environment with all of these uncritical expectations, and with the fears that accompany being first, and knowing that there are some people, while there are some who are praying for you and encouraging you, you also know there are others that are waiting in the wing for you to fail. They're just mistakes that we do make, and we learn over time, I think, to not take things personal. David Boyle told me something. He's gone home to be with God now, but he was a good friend, great preacher. But he told me something when we ordained our first set of deacons, and he just said it out of the clear blue. He didn't say it. We would laugh, and he was saying, yeah, I'm the pastor today, but you know, next week I might not. He said, you know, in the Baptist church, they'll take your name off the sign and won't even tell you.
Yes, ma'am.
So we were laughing about that and everything. And he said, but you know what, Gina? He said, I've learned not to take it personal. He said, don't take it personal. And Reverend Elaine Flake said that to me one day. She was preaching for me one Sunday, and we drove up, and you know, I looked at the parking lot. I can always tell what the crowd's gonna be like by the cars. And I was like, you know, the saints come to church when they get ready. She said, Gina, don't take it personal. Don't take it personal. And I remember them saying that. Dr. Boyle and Reverend Elaine, both of them said that to me at pivotal moments in my ministry. But I think it's so appropriate, because if the truth be told, we do take a lot of things personal.
Yes.
We do. I did. And sometimes I still do. I mean, I'm not saying not that I have obtained,
but this one
or apprehended. I pressed toward the
yes,
mark.
Lord. Come on here.
But I do believe that at 35, you know, being young and being the first, and you know, being fearful and all of that, all of the other things that were converging at that moment, I probably took things a lot more personal than I should have in some instances. And you know, in retrospect, when I just think about the way people adjusted, that's really what I was really referring to about extra grace. You know, a lot of times when people can be so mean to women in ministry. So rude. You know, I say this all the time. You don't have to like what I do or even like me, but at least be kind. You know, you don't have to be rude and nasty and ugly, you know, and people can do all of that. They can do all of that. But I think if I were talking to my 35-year-old self now, I say it that way, I would probably say to that 35-year-old self what I know now, and that is the same thing that Boyle and Flake said to me: don't take it personal, and realize that people need time to grow.
But Dr. Gina, this is Dr. Brenda, and I'm curious, as a Baptist, when will we move even further toward having women leading churches as pastors? We still you're the only one I still know from 1995. I don't know of any other women, Baptist women, who are pastors of great congregations. Like, I'll say it that way.
Well, you know what? It's shifting. In fact, 3 years after I was elected, Reverend Mary Moore was elected to New Salem Baptist Church in Memphis, which is a church where C.L. Franklin pastored for a very brief season. And then I guess maybe 5 to 6 years maybe after that, Dr. Lynn Dandridge, I'm not really sure how long when Dr. Dandridge was elected, but she's still serving her church in Memphis. And she followed a very egalitarian type of pastor and leader, Dr. Reuben Green. She pastors Central Baptist Church in Memphis, and she's been there quite a while. And I believe, I don't know that she grew up in that church, but I know in some ways she was a daughter of that church. Dr. Leslie Callahan pastors, and I'm talking about people that have been elected now. I'm not talking about people that have actually started their own church.
Right.
I'm talking about people that have been elected. Dr. Leslie Callahan pastors in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and she just celebrated 10 years. Well, this was her 11th year pastoring her church. So I think the tide is shifting, but we still have a long way to go. But what I would say to a woman is, if a church is vacant and the church doesn't have it in their bylaws, which in some instances the churches have it in their bylaws,
Right.
but if it's not in their bylaws, go ahead and apply. You have the credentials, submit your credentials, and let God do the rest. I think that it's going to take that. Women are going to have to assert themselves. And then I think that also those of us who are in places where we serve and where we lead, it's up to us to let our ceiling be somebody else's floor.
My God.
Meaning that we too have to advocate and try to open doors and use our influence in ways that women are considered for pastoring. In fact, I was just talking to a colleague of mine the other day. There's a church in Memphis that's becoming vacant. And I said to her, you should submit your credentials. I mean, what do you have to lose? All they can do is say yes or no. I think sometimes women don't think about. I remember when my pastor died, the Sunday morning, he died on a Wednesday. The Sunday morning after he died, that Sunday morning, brothers were dropping their resumes off by the church. He was not even cold, and they were dropping resumes off by the church. So women, I think about something. Is it Senator Val Demings or Congress? She's a congresswoman.
Congresswoman.
At the NAACP women's luncheon last year, she said she was talking about when she decided to run for Congress. She said that she was talking to a friend of hers, and he told her it takes women 7 more times than men to make up their mind to try something. He said if somebody says something to a woman about attempting something, a woman has to ask 7 different. Do you think I can do it? Oh,
wow.
I think I can handle it. What am I
Yeah,
good?
Wow.
Will they accept me? She said, he told him, but you tell a man that, a man says, I'll make a great congressman. See myself. Because the way we're socialized, we're socialized to second guess ourselves. Because when we display a level of confidence, then we get labeled.
Right.
And of course,
Watch it.
a lot of times we don't want to be labeled.
Right.
And so we have a tendency to kind of shrink wrap ourselves in the interest of not being labeled or misunderstood, if you will. But I think that, we're in a season now where people are beginning to discover that women can lead and women can pastor. I mean, we've always known that, but because women are doing it. And so I believe that churches will begin to be more open. But I don't think it's going to be without a struggle.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Stewart. We talked about the men who are colleagues of other pastors. I've found that one of my biggest challenges has really been more of the women within the congregation than it has been the men within the congregation. What have you found in your years of pastoring and being in this now? What has your experience been like?
I agree with you that the women can be just as difficult as the men sometimes. Sometimes it can be worse. It's a part of what internalized oppression does to us. You've been socialized to believe there are certain places and certain things that you cannot do, certain roles that you cannot have. When you step into non-traditional roles or roles that are quote unquote reserved for males or male gender. And, when you've been socialized to believe that, then, it's almost like the self-hatred almost that blacks have for blacks. And so when a woman steps into that role that has been historically held by a man, and you've been told all your life that, if you step into this role, you've stepped out of your place. You have no business, doing this. You have no business being in this role. And not just, and it's not just in ministry, it's in any non-traditional. I have a colleague, a friend girl that's a dentist, and she said, a lot of times when she goes in, now she doesn't experience that, but in her early years of dentistry, when she would go in and she'd walk in the room and they would see her, they would say, I was looking for the dentist, not a little girl. And I remember when Judge Nancy Sorak, when I was first called to the ministry, a lot of people sent me letters, and Judge Nancy Sorak invited me to go out to lunch, and she was talking about the resentment and the hostility that she encountered as being one of the first women in the law school. So when I think, well, let me just, that's the secondary or symptom. The root of it is that sexism and misogyny and patriarchy has to be dismantled. And we never really have those conversations. We talk about the symptoms of it. But when you think about what sexism does, sexism induces a notion of inferiority on a certain gender, on a person based on their gender. And so you can be a sexist and be a woman, because it has to do with how you view someone as inferior or incompetent or incapable. When I used to work as a director of admissions for a community college, Dean Mary Cole Nichols was interviewing, I don't remember whether I think she was actually she may have been interviewing for the president of the college at that time. I don't remember, but I do remember this. A woman asked her, "Do you think you have what it takes to lead this college?" I'll never forget what she said. She said, "Brains make decisions, not gender." But hear me with your good ear. Girl. A woman asked her the question.
Jesus.
A woman asked her, "Do you think you have what it takes to lead this institution?" What gets me is that most people would never think to ask a man that question. It's automatically assumed that men are capable. And I'm not saying that they're not, but women often have more credentials, more experience, more grace, but we are often relegated to the sidelines because sexism, misogyny, and patriarchy needs to be dismantled. It's deeply embedded in our churches and in society. It's why people would not vote they did not vote straight down the ballot.
Yep.
That's how we ended up where we are today, because they held their nose and voted for somebody, and I won't even call his name.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Current occupant, because they could not deal with a woman as president. So sexism is real, and the problem is a lot of times when you start talking about sexism, people think you're talking about sexist. So then it becomes a personal attack when, as Dr. Renita Weems would say, you can critique a system and not have to critique the person. Sexism is a system. It's embedded in structures and institutions. And it's what causes us, even as women, to ask me, "Well, what you want me to call you? Do I call you Miss? Do I call you Reverend?"
Wow.
Who asked the brothers that? Who asked the brothers?
Wow.
That's why I'm going to walk up to me and say, "Hey, Gina, I go to Bishop so and so and so and so church." My members cuss them out. I'm not saying that. But, they like, don't come up to me and call my pastor about her first name. Not that we tripping. I'm just saying, though, this is
called being common with the anointing.
Well, the thing of it is, it's the way that we lightly esteem and we minimize and we push women to the margins and we truncate women's gifts and refuse to acknowledge, give them or give us the honor, if to some extent, that we give some of the brothers don't even have a real degree.
I ain't walk by school.
I'm gonna get in trouble like that. I'm talking about get in trouble. Some of them don't even have real degrees. And we have gone and earned our degrees. We have put through blood, sweat, and tears. And then a woman a lot of times walk up to you and call me Gina, call you Chalice, which is not a big deal. But I'm using that to say that oftentimes it's the way we've been socialized. It's what sexism and patriarchy has done. We live in a man's world.
Oh,
you helping the folks today
without a woman or a girl.
That's right. That's right.
That's what James said.
What I have done, you didn't ask me this either, but
you helping us here. You helping us.
What I do though, because one of the things I think has to be addressed when new members join our church, I always say, let's address the elephant in the room. Because this bodysuit that I'm in is not typical. And I know that at some point, somebody is going to have something to say to you about being a member of this church. So let's just go ahead on and talk to it. Let's go on and talk about it. Let's address the elephant in the room. And so I talk to them about these problematic passages of scripture that are often used to subjugate and marginalize women. I give them articles, and I also recommend that they read a book called What Paul Really Said About Women to help them so that they can kind of navigate through all of the noise that they will hear from some people. And I say to them, I said, the goal is not to win the argument. Because if the people really wanted to win the argument, to be honest, it's too late for the discussion.
Ooh.
It's too late. It's really too late for the discussion. But since they do want to talk to you and they want to come to you, I'm not interested in you winning the argument. I'm interested in you remaining rooted where you came.
Doctor.
Don't allow them to make you second guess the decision that you've made, so that you end up thinking that you and God made a mistake.
Ooh. Oh, that's good. That's good. Oh my God, you are blessing us, Doctor. You blessing us. I wanted to talk about the book a little bit. I know we have about 2 minutes. I see Dr. Burns said we got 2 minutes.
And I give 5-minute answers.
Listen, I love it. But this book, one of the questions was, do you have a book? Do you have a movie? You need to do a mini series. But this book right here is called We Got Next. It's 10 powerful messages, hope, and transformation for women. You have to get this book. Not only is there a book, Dr. Stewart.
You got the real deal now. That's the real deal.
Come on here. She makes this slamming trail mix that y'all need to get. You need to go on her website. Dr. Gina Stewart, will you give them the website so they can go on? But when you get this trail mix, the proceeds go to a charity. So will you explain to them what's going on with that?
Yes. My nonprofit is called Greater Works. And it's a nonprofit devoted to ministry development and philanthropy. And in a nutshell, what I try to do with the proceeds from the trail mix and book sales is I give mini grants, MINI grants, to nonprofits, ministries, and churches that are led by women. That's basically what I do. So, it just depends on what I have in the bank. I'll send a gift to a nonprofit to support their work, because many people are doing great work, but they don't have the capacity. And of course, what I'm sending is not going to make a really big difference, but it could be an encouragement to somebody who is trying to do a good work and do a great work, that to know that somebody is investing in their ministry. The website is www.greaterworks-drgms.org.
Say it again, please.
Greater Works, www.greaterworks-drgms.org.
She's going to put it in the comment section. I don't know if you see CJ saying that the trail mix is the will of God.
It's the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you.
Come on here, because CJ.
Hey, look, can I tell you? I make it myself with my own.
I know.
These hands make that trail mix.
And it's the bomb. I keep it by my computer and eat it all day.
Dr. Bradford, will you share with us as we come to our closing moments who our guest is with us on next week? Dr. Stewart, thank you so very much for being with us.
you.
Hold on for us backstage. We'll be right back with you. Don't leave us.
Okay.
Dr. Stewart has blessed our soul today. But next week, we have Reverend Verzola Law. Come on in the room, come back, same time, same channel, same website, or same page. God is going to bless us continuously. Don't forget, get that trail mix so you can help another woman that is in ministry. And the book, of course. Love you. Bye.